Okay, as mentioned, I'm Mike, W7VO, and I'm also the Northwestern Division Director for the ARRL. However, here's my disclaimer. The content of this following presentation is informational only. Any views or opinions opined here or as a part of following discussion are mine and mine alone, not reflect the official views of opinions of the ARRL or its management. The only people that can talk for the ARRL are the ARRL CEO and the president. So I'm not here to talk as anything other than a member of the committee and a director and my own personal views of some of the stuff as an amateur radio operator as you guys are. So just a disclaimer, I'm not speaking for the ARRL. Let's make that quite clear. Here's our agenda. We're gonna have a little brief history lesson that I did a little research on where some of the bands that we have came from. Background information on the current FCC dockets affecting band planning. You guys that were in the EC meeting yesterday may have heard, I hope you heard Mr. Siddall talk about, or Monday I guess it was, talk about where we are with these. I know I asked him after the meeting was over and some of you guys may have dropped off, so we're gonna have a little update on that. A discussion about the current HF band plans as they are prepared to be submitted to the FCC. They're not submitted to the FCC yet, but they have been approved by the board. They've been approved by the board almost a year ago. It'll be a year ago last July that they were approved. The latest FCC actions regarding the 3.3 gigahertz, the 9 centimeter band, and the 5.8 gigahertz band, where that is currently. You've seen some ARRL releases out, but you may have missed those, so we'll just cover those very briefly. And you may say, well, why is that important to me? Well, we're going to talk about that maybe a little bit too. And then I'll have a little session for questions and comments at the end, if everybody's still here and not falling asleep. So let's go back to 1928, right? And here's what the amateur radio bands looked like in 1928. You notice that they've got a little center of harmonic family here because back then everything was crystal controlled. And with crystal controlled, you wanted to be able to use the same crystal for multiple bands by going on a different harmonic of the crystal. So all the original US amateur bands, which included the 160 meter band, 80, 40, 20, 10, and 5 meter, all had a center that could be, one crystal could be used to get all of the different bands. However, you know what? I'm missing a slide. Let me go back a second here. Something went through. Something got skipped. That's interesting. A slide got lost. Well, anyway, 2 of my slides aren't here anymore. Wow. Well, let's try it again. There was a couple of slides that where it talked about the fact that before 1912 there were no amateur bands, and in the radioactive 1912 gave all frequencies below 200 meters in wavelength to amateurs because they were considered to be useless. And of course, amateurs made good use to it. Back then, everybody were on all the bands at the same time anyway, right, using spark gap transmitters. And it wasn't until the radioactive 1927 that U.S. amateur bands were formally recognized. Although I had a couple slides for that, but it fell off the presentation somehow. So the question is, you saw all those bands, where's 15 meters? Right, 50 meter band's not there. The 50 meter band was added in 1947 at the International Radio Conference. And the reason that the FCC gave us the band was they had essentially taken the band away from amateurs during World War II when LORAN was developed and used for the war. As you may recall from my history of the ham radio call sign that the U.S. amateurs lost their station licenses in 1941, just shortly after Pearl Harbor. And so they had, since they were on the band anyway, LORAN moved in, took over the 160 meter band, and essentially made it useless for amateurs back then. So in a compensation for that, they gave us this wonderful band, 15 meters, which is actually my favorite amateur band when there are sunspots, in 1947, shortly after the war. And so the main thing is that what I'm trying to make here is to tell you guys that that there's been evolutions in band planning the whole way from 1912 all the way up to the present. It'll probably continue to evolve as technology, amateur radio technology evolves. An example of that, of course, was 1952. The novice 75-watt CW allocation was opened up, right, for us novices back in the old days. The work bands, right? The work bands, they consist of the 30-meter band, the 17-meter band, the 12-meter band. And by the way, these are, what do these bands have in common? They are bands that I have never operated on, ever in my life. And why? Because I'm a contester. These aren't contesting bands. So the guys that are complaining about contesters taking over the bands, there are some other bands that are reserved to where you can't contest at all. These were named after the World Administrative Radio Conference, which in 1979 created this allocation of these bands and turned them over to amateur use. They were finally open for use in the U.S. in the early 1980s. I don't know the exact year. The 60-meter band. This is the newest of our HF bands. It was given to us in channelized form, authorized by the ITU in 2002 and formalized in the 2015 ITU Radio Telecommunications Company known as WRC 15. However, we're on this band, unlike the other bands, we're on there as a secondary basis, and there are many restrictions in place, including not only bandwidth and mode type restrictions, but also power limitations. That's where this is one band where the 1500 watt amateur limit does not apply. Now let's talk about the FCC activities. There are currently 4 FCC actions that are pending, soon to be 5. The RM11828 is the one that everybody's been talking about. You haven't heard much about it lately because there's really been no activity, but it's the technician class enhancement proposal for rulemaking, or they're abbreviated at the FCC with this designator of RM. And we're going to talk about that in detail. RM11708, greater flexibility in digital communications, which doesn't really affect band planning, except that it kind of does. We're going to talk about why it does, because it begot another one that does affect it. RM11831, amateur digital mode transparency. Between RM1178 and RM11831 are the reason that we have our new HF digital band plan I'm going to be talking about now that's ready to be submitted to the FCC. And including in that, which I discovered in doing research, I'm on the HF band planning committee for the ARRL, and that was, I uncovered RM11759 was another one that's been hanging out there, which was realignment of the 80-meter band. And so we're going to be talking about what that does too. So let's first of all talk about RM11828, the technician enhancement proposal. This would extend the amateur class privileges to include essentially the top 100 kilohertz on three of the major ham bands, on 80 meters from 3.9 to 4 megahertz, on 75 kilohertz on 40 meters from 7.225 to 7300. And they get 100 kilohertz on 15 meters from 21.350 to 21.450. The one thing you notice they don't get here is any allocation on 20 meters. You want to get on 20 meters and work the world 24 hours a day during maximum sunspots, get your general class license. Does not include 160 meters either, or any of the work bands, but does include most of where MCOM activity has taken place. A lot of the, I'd say the 90% of the phone HF voice nets for MCOM use are up in these upper frequencies. So the idea is to try to get people that are already engaged in MCOM activities, give them ability to help the nets and help out the MCOM side with phone. Also add RIDI and digital privileges to current technician allocations, where right now they only have CW on 80, 40, and 15 meters. So right now, if you have a technician class license, you can operate all the CW you want. The question is, how many technicians know any CW? And the answer is almost none of them. In fact, I have yet to ever run into one that's actually taken the time to learn CW. So we're going to add RIDI and digital. That also gives them the ability to operate WinLink through PACTOR on the HF bands as part of MCOM. And also, but however, the power on these expanded bands will be limited to 200 watts PEP. If you want to run 1.5 kilowatts, you're going to have to get your general. RM11708, greater flexibility in digital communications. This was what we call the symbol rate petition, and this was to change with the designator for the bandwidth from to a bandwidth in kilohertz rather than specifying a 300 baud data rate, which goes back to the old hang-up modem days back in probably in the 1970s. It also would also authorize, because of the increased symbol rate, would authorize a PACTOR 4 to be used, which is a faster protocol for areas MCOM use and HF wind linking boosts. And people often think that this was done strictly to legalize PACTOR 4, and that's not the case at all. It happens to be a result of it, not a cause for it. And by the way, this RM1178 has been around so long, it's actually been in the comment phase since November of 2013, which if you do your math, we'll know was quite a few years ago, 9 years ago. No, 8 years ago. And some want this modified to include a ban on automatically controlled digital stations. Those are wind link stations that come up, you know, they receive a signal that they can decode, they come on and don't care who else is on the band. There's been a lot of controversy about these ACDS digital stations. And a lot of these do not incorporate busy detector technology. And there's been all kinds of tests to figure out how to do that. And I'm not sure where they are, but they're trying to get the ability for these automatically controlled digital stations to be able to detect if somebody's already using the frequency before they just come up and start transmitting, as they do right now. In 2016, the FCC released docket 16.239, which states that they did agree that the symbol rate mode was archaic. We're the only people in the world that still call it baud rather than a bandwidth. However, they further stated that we observed that while this bandwidth limitation would accommodate data emissions that are in common use today, in other words, wherever you can squish into there, you could use, it would also undermine the fundamental service of amateur radio to basically encourage activities increasing technology. So why limit it at all? Why limit the bandwidth? So it's one of those cases where be careful what you wish for, right? Who wants a 12 kilohertz wide digital signal taking over an entire band, you know, maybe with a couple hundred kilobits of data throughput? There's got to be some kind of restriction. So the ARRL went back to the FCC and said, no, forget about that. That's not going to work. Thank you very much for thinking of us and coming up with this bright idea, but you know, no, we can't have that happen. It also raised concerns, of course, everybody, that these wideband digital signals would take over the entire digital portion of the amateur radio bands on the HF bands. And there's already enough opposition as it is, so that just was not going to work. That was a thank you very much, but no thank you. RM11759, amendment of this is officially its title is Amendment of FART 97 of the Commission's Amateur Radio Service Rules to facilitate high-frequency data communications. However, this was submitted in February of 2016 by the ARRL, but really is all it did was it modified the 80-meter RTTY and data subband so that it extends from 3500, which is the bottom of the band, up to 3650 rather than 3600 where it ends now. A while ago, the FCC had removed that extra 50 kilohertz from 3600 to 3650 and gave it to the extras as an extra-only phone band. However, that spectrum now, especially with FTA and all these modern digital technologies, and amateurs just are not on phone as much as they used to be. It's much more efficient to turn this band back over to digital, which is really, I think we could all agree, is where the future of digital communication, or where the communications are going forward. It's interesting to know, if you guys read the ARRL bulletin a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was even last week, they talked about that they did an internet traffic survey on all the HF bands here a while ago and found out that a full 2/3 of all the traffic right now that is on the HF bands is FT8 and FT4. They're all the FT series. So if you want to know about a paradigm shifting technology, the FT-X technologies are definitely taking over the airwaves. And it also gives back the 3600 to 3650 back to the general advanced class licensees. Remember, I mentioned it was given to extras only, and the generals and technicians were kicked off that part of the band. So this would give that portion of the spectrum back to them again. RM 11759 also stipulates that would also give the novice and technician class some RIDI and data subbands. However, this portion of that portion of it would essentially go away with RM 11828 because it would supersede it. It's already incorporated. Would modify the ability or the segment of 80 meter band that was available for the ACDS stations. However, it moves the window up, but because we're making the window wider and moving it up, this becomes a moot point also. So this portion of the RM is now moot. And also provide RIDI and data privileges to both the novices in the 15 meter segment and their 80 meter segment, which also overlaps RM 11828. So these three portions of the original RM 11759 are now obsolete and will be replaced and superseded by RM 11828, which I just went over with you. And now we get into the real controversial one, RM 11831, amateur digital mode transparency. This was submitted in 2018, written by Ron Kolarik, K0IDT. Essentially, his whole point is to ensure that all digital modes can be received over the airs by others. He was essentially targeting backdoor and WinLink messages, but basically any protocol that you can't just turn your radio and listen to, or had anything other than an open source protocol. And WinLink, as we know, and backdoor is a proprietary protocol. They've, I think, since opened it up in the last year, but originally it started off being a proprietary protocol, single source, single vendor. The real question is, also that comes up, is data compression or any form of data compression where you just can't tune into a signal and listen to it, a form of encryption with the intent to obscure, which is specifically forbidden in FCC rules. So if the fact that you compress something to the point where you can't understand it without some kind of a decoder, a special decoder, does that make it encryption with the intent to obscure? And that really became part of the equation. And they had, of course, concerns of enforcement and unauthorized use of digital communications by commercial interest, right? What's to keep somebody from using a digital mode that cannot be decoded, is encrypted, and use it for hauling commercial traffic, which is against the rules, but because you don't know what it is or where it's coming from, they don't use call signs. How do you ever enforce it? So the idea is to try to bring amateur radio, keep it as open as possible so we can have some kind of enforcement activity for parties that chose not to follow the rules. There's also concerns on the MCOM sailboat side that if this thing went through and they did say that, well, Backdoor 4 is encrypted, it's or Backdoor itself is encrypted, it's compressed, therefore it's illegal, and of course WinLink would go away, and so would all the email services that are provided for the MCOM and the sailboat side of the amateur radio world. And by the way, WinLink is the universal standard for communications right now. At least it is in the state of Oregon. I'm sure it is, and also in many jurisdictions. So the whole part of this that goes in here, and probably Bill and some other of the Carl and a couple other people on here, there was a big letter writing campaign that took place the middle of 2019 or so. That began, dear ARRL director, what are you idiots doing? Right? Why are you guys doing all this stuff? Why are you, because there were being messages sent from both sides of this thing, and the ARRL was kind of stuck in the middle. The WinLink people were trying to say what their side was. The digital transparency side had their views, and the two were fighting each other, and everybody was blaming the ARRL. So we got a lot of nasty letters and had to respond to a lot of mail during this kind of contentious period. It's since settled down, by the way. So the result of all this contention was that the ARRL reinstituted the HF Band Plan Committee. It had been dead for a few years, but the idea was it was reactivated to look at where this automatically controlled digital station could be put, how we could handle digital allocations, and really see if it was feasible at all on any of the bands to increase the amount of digital spectrum available to allow for the future growth of digital communications, which really, as we know, are probably the future of digital. I think, you're going to see more digital voice out there. You're going to see narrower bandwidths for voice. You're going to see more compression. You're going to see more of everything. More, who knows when the next FT-X version is going to come out that's going to be take up even less bandwidth than FT8 does. A single FT8 station only occupies 50 hertz of bandwidth. That's pretty darn narrow. The committee members as they exist today: Mike Raisbeck, our first vice president of the ARRL, is the chairman. Kermit Carlson out of the Central Division. Rhea is a director in the Hudson Division, myself here in the Northwestern Division, Ned Stearns, AA7A, vice director in the Southwest Division, and Dale Williams, director in the Great Lakes Division. We are all members of the committee appointed this year. We say it was reinstituted at the end of 2019, and we still have the committee going. Although we haven't had a meeting in probably 8 or 9 months, it's been really not much activity, but it does exist. The missions that we had at the time was to seek regulatory changes to FCC Part 97. So we're not talking about voluntary band planning here. We're talking about hard, fast FCC rules, like where the CW ends, where the digital gonna go. And the idea was to expand the digital CW mode on 80 meters back to what it was per RM11759, expand messaging and ACDS digital channel capacity to support our MCOM emergency communications purpose, Part 97.1 of the FCC rules. And that would require a Part 97.221 paragraph B deletion or some significant change to it about where these ACDS stations are located, support existing digital modes and allow for the future, right? And then also the idea was to put the wideband digital and narrowband digital into separate sandboxes. I mentioned that FT8 has a 50 hertz bandwidth, right? A Pactor 4 signal could be 2.4 to 2.8 kilohertz wide, which means you could gobble up 50 FT8 signals in the bandwidth of one wideband channel Pactor signal. So the idea is that they're not really compatible with each other, and maybe we might want to think about putting them into different sandboxes so they can both play together and not have so much interaction and the ability for the big guy to step on the little guy. And that would help satisfy part of the complaints that were addressed in RM11831. And the idea also, as far from my perspective as a member of the ARRL Band Plan Committee, is to tick off as few hams as possible in the process, right? Nobody's going to be completely happy. There are going to be people that are complaining about, why are we giving technicians all these extra frequencies, make them get their general? Why aren't we supporting WinLink? Why are we supporting WinLink, right? Why are you guys doing this? Because you're all idiots. So the idea is to try to tick off as few hams as possible. And I can tell you, from my view, sitting in this seat as a director for the last 3 years, it's impossible to do. The assumptions we had were that RM11828, RM11759, and RM11708 would all be enacted. The technician enhancement, the 80 meter proposal, and the bandwidth proposal are all enacted. What we did not tackle as a committee was the encryption compression debate per RM11831, right? What is compression a form of encryption? We don't care about that. No, we're looking at band planning. We don't want to care about the politics side of it. Whether or not ACDS is in violation of FCC rules if there's no listen before transmit technology involved. Let the FCC worry about that. The ARRL was not going to get involved in that debate. The intent was not to fully FCC regulate the spectrum, to mostly use voluntary band planning to keep as much harmony as modes as we can, but just basically give people, not to say that FT8 has to be here and MFSK has to be here and RIDI has to be here, right? Not divide it up into that small a sandbox, but say that wideband digital can be here, narrowband can be up here if you want to play up here, but if you do it, you're at your own risk, but you got this reserved area down here. And so that's kind of what it was. We're trying to keep the harmony among the various digital modes. The result, we did a lot of research in preparation for developing our band plans. We looked at the history. We looked at skimming data through the reverse beacon network. and contest data to find out where the RTTY contesters were in the big RTTY contest, where the CW guys were operating. We know where FT8 is, we know where FT4 is, we know where the WinLink guys are because they all have established frequencies. You know, they got their own little turf that's carved out. We looked and reviewed all the current ITU band plans for regions 1 through 3 on the HF side of it. And also reviewed band plans for other major players, which is the RSGB, what they're doing in Canada, what they're doing in Europe, and several of the big European countries to see what they're doing for their HF digital band plans. You know, the one thing about the ITU band plans is they're fairly they're voluntary, so countries can choose to. They're not required to change or to follow the recommendations of the ITU. They're recommendations. So even we don't comply with all of them in region 2. We had a crystal ball to predict the future, right? We don't know what the digital landscape is going to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. I'd like to be able to think I'm going to be here to see that, but I'm probably not. But yet we have to plan for that somehow. The assumptions were made were to be increased use of digital over CW. And this, by the way, I originally did this presentation almost a year ago. And sure enough, we've gone from about 50% FT8 in the last year to almost 2/3 of all traffic on the HF bands now is just FT8 and FT4. And there's going to be more new modes invented, right, with higher data rates and less bandwidth. The idea, I think, is going to be less wideband and more narrowband technology. And just as I mentioned, this was a 2-hour snapshot on PSK Reporter that AA7A Ned brought to our committee, and you can see during this 2-hour window that he shot. I don't know when this was. I think it was in October of 2019. I think is when he actually took this. At that point, 94% of all the traffic on I believe this was on all the HF bands was FT8, and 5% was FT4, and the next highest was 0.2% was CW, and sideband was way down here at about 0.001%. And then the other digital modes, RTTY was down here, and basically it wasn't even worth mentioning. So a full 90 at this point, 99% in this 2-hour window was FT8, FT4. Okay, if that doesn't tell you that there's a paradigm shift occurring in amateur radio, you've got your head in the sand. So here's what the results were. A final version of the committee report was submitted to the ARRL board in early February. It was approved at the July 2020 meeting. We developed a scheme where the CW and narrowband digital was kept down low. The wideband digital and all CDS is up high on each band, each of the HF bands. And by the way, narrowband digital and CW, as you guys may recall, is allowed anywhere in any amateur band. CW is always allowed. Everybody says, well, you know, you guys are squeezing out the CW guys. You guys have the entire amateur radio spectrum, right? And you have none of that, but you have the narrowest filters in your radios. You got plenty of spectrum to use. I'm a CW guy myself, and I've never, except during a major contest at the bottom end of the band, there's hardly ever crowded enough where you can't find some place to operate. However, so we're still gonna allow narrowband digital, and CW will also be allowed up high. CW, of course, is allowed everywhere. We do expect voluntary band plans to be developed among users, and I'll talk about that at the very end here, but the ARRL may get involved more with working with the big digital players to come up with some voluntary band plans in writing so that people kind of know where they're going to be and can expect what's going to happen. But once again, those are going to be voluntary. The ARRL for a while set up a comment location on the website and an interactive groups on the groups.io reflector. We had several hundred comments. And by the way, this is the first time that the ARRL came out electronically and asked for feedback, right? I ran on a transparency platform a few years ago when I ran for the board, and this is the result of that was that we have got in there and have kind of changed the ARRL's thinking to know that we've got to go back to the members and get their feedback on stuff. So we presented this band plan and asked people for their input, and we got a lot of great input. It kind of turned in for a while back into the WinLink pro and anti-WinLink crowd fighting each other, but there was, if you picked all that stuff out of there, there was a lot of good activity that took place. And by the way, that's now been, it's been a year or so. That's now over. There's no more time to comment on anything on the FCC side, and the ARRL band planning has been pretty much done. We've approved it. So here's what the plan is. It addresses changes only the HF bands, no changes on either the 160 meter band or 60 meter band. And I'm going to provide you a band by band comparison and provide you what it currently looks like today and what it will be once the recommendations are implemented. And you'll see there's not a huge amount of changes. And it uses the same format as the US amateur bands graphic you guys have all seen, which is available on the ARRL website. It's in just about every issue of QST that I open. ACDS is, by the way, the ACDS operations for WinLink traffic is not currently on the existing ARRL chart, so we're going to put it on our chart just so you know where it is. Current frequencies where they are or will be shown on our current band plan graphic. That's what I just said. And keep in mind, there are no changes to CW allocations throughout the amateur bands, right? It's still CW is allowed everywhere. And also RIDI and other narrowband and non-ACCDS modes are going to be permitted anywhere data modes are provided. So the narrowband guys are going to have their own area up on top, but they're not really alone, because if the little guys want to get up there and play with the big boys, they can do that. So you guess this should look familiar to just about everybody here that's open to QST magazine up, right? This is the current digital or the current band plan. And we developed our new band plan kind of using the same format. So let's talk about them kind of band by band, starting with the 80 meter band. We changed the low end of the band up to 3.650 for the digital part, consistent with RM11759. Remember, it was at 3600. Added a narrowband and wideband data area and made that area for wideband, narrowband data, and also, of course, CW. Permit ACDS operation only between 3600 and 3650. Moved it out from where it is now and move it up into that 50 kilohertz segment. So this gave them a bigger window for the wider traffic. There's a lot of WinLink traffic that occurs for MCOM purposes for using NVIS antennas interstate on 80 meters. Expands so the advanced and general class operators can use that frequency spectrum, and also added the technician class privileges consistent with RM112828, and also added RIDI data operating privileges for novices consistent with RM11759. So here's what it looks like. At the top up here, is the current 80 meter band plan as it exists right now, and I've shown you where these current automatically controlled digital station windows are as defined in the FCC rules. And this is what you see in the current ARRL. This is our new proposed one that's going to be submitted to the FCC, where we basically added the extra 50 kilohertz here of digital CW and wideband digital, but saying that the wideband digital people can only be between 3600 and 3650. Before they were 3685 to 3600. So we've given them a lot bigger window, but everybody gets a bigger window in this case. On 40 meters, added wideband data between 7100 and 7125. Expanded ACDS width what their bandwidth limitations are. Each ACDS station takes up about 2.5 kilohertz of bandwidth, so you can only get 2 simultaneously on in kind of channelized mode in 5 kilohertz. Now we're able to do up to 10. Changes ACDS operation from 7100 to 7125, the top end of that portion of the band. They add the expanded technician class privileges, add clarification for band plan for US amateurs operating outside Region 2. This is a request put into us from Joe Speroni, who may be on here tonight, AH0A. The section manager for Hawaii. They have their own particular purposes for using portions of the 80 meter band, so we incorporated that into our band plan at their request. No recommendations, however, for any ACDS be outside Region 2. They didn't feel that was our prerogative to do that. And so here we have the 40 meters as it exists today, and then 40 meters as it exists in our new band plan. You can see down here the technicians now have a phone privilege from 7225 to 7300, and then the digital portion has been extended, and the technicians and novice now have data and data privileges where they didn't have data privileges before. 30-meter band, add wideband digital from 3120 or for 10135 to 10150. It expands the ACDS operation to 15 kilohertz. And so here we've just basically expanded it a little bit wider, but limited 200 watts PEP as that band is. For 20 meters, add wideband data from 14.105 to 14.150. Expand the ACDS operations to 45 kilohertz wide from 14.105 to 14.150. And so here's the new band here. Notice there are no technician or novice privileges on 20 meters. You want to work the magic band, get your general class license. And by the way, even in the RTTY contest, there's not a lot of activity at the high end of the 20-meter band. There was actually some more than I've seen in the past in the last RTTY contest I operated, but generally there's not a lot of activity up in here, so it was a good place to put the wideband digital guys. On the 17-meter band, added wideband data from 18.105 to 18.110, so just basically it's pretty much unchanged, except gave the ability to for ACDS to have, looks like they got the same amount of bandwidth, but we're allowing the narrowband guys to be in that sandbox as well. So this one really didn't change too much. 15-meter band added the wideband data from 21.150 to 2200, basically the top 50 kilohertz. Added the technician class privileges consistent with RM 11828. Added RTTY and data operating privileges consistent with RM 11759. So here's the existing band as it exists now, and here's how it would be after our recommendations are incorporated. You've got the new technician class phone ability down here, 200 watts from 21.350 to 21.450, the top 100 kilohertz. And of course, the ability for the technicians to operate RTTY and digital down here in the Y end of the bands. And instead of this little chunk in the middle for ACDS, we moved them up to the high end of the band. 12-meter band, kind of the same thing as the 17-meter band, not a whole lot of change, same bandwidth, just gave them their own sandbox here to play with. 10-meter band, added wideband data from 28.120 to 28.190. We also added, and we tried a little talk with the satellite folks, experimental data band from 29.200 to 29.3 for extra advanced and general class license classes. So it's kind of reserved, or a spot where they can hang out to do their experimental data for satellite use. Expands ACDS operation an additional 100 kilohertz from 29.2 to 29.3. And it also includes the expanded technician class privileges consistent with RM 11828. So here's the existing 10-meter band as it exists now, and now you've got an extra. You've got the technician enhancement proposal here. You've got the ACDS in this chunk of the band. You've also got an extra data portion up between 29.2 and 29.3. So which was not there before. So that's been included. I think we can all agree there's plenty of room on 10 meters for just about anything you'd want to do there. So what happens now, right? This is new. Well, we had a meeting, the executive committee meeting for the ARRL board was held on Monday, and I specifically asked our FCC counsel, David Siddall, what's going on with this thing? It's been a year. And he suggested, and didn't really state for fact, but that he expects action will occur sometime in Q3 or Q4 of this year. One of the things that hasn't happened is he has not even submitted the proposal for the HF band plan change yet, even though it was approved by the board. I think a lot has to do with COVID. I think he wants to not submit this to the FCC until they're ready to start looking at it right away, so it doesn't wind up in somebody's inbox and not be acted upon. The FCC, as we've all heard, is very actively engaged right now with 5G and for telecom, and I think he wants to give all this to them at the right moment when they're actually ready to start looking at it. He also mentioned it's very likely to be enacted as an omnibus action. What they do is they take all these RMs and roll them all into one big ball, right? And then throw that out for comments, and then finally turn it into an NPRM and then enact it or do something else with it. But they're not going to treat each one individually. They're most likely going to roll all these, especially since they overlap. You know, this new proposal overlaps a couple of the other existing RMs that have been out there for a few years. And so really stay tuned for further news. This is kind of a pet project of mine. I've been very active on as a part of this band planning committee. And I want to see this thing get through and get enacted, and we can all go back and to enjoying amateur radio a little bit more. And we'll definitely get a lot more activity as sunspots come on if we can start getting these technicians on here, give them a flavor of what HF is like beyond just CW, and get them to upgrade their licenses. I think it's going to be a positive impact for amateur radio, and I'm looking forward to them enacting this thing. So really stay tuned for further news. I keep bugging Sadal. I think he's tired of listening to me about it. Let's talk real quickly about the 3.3 gigahertz and the 5.9 gigahertz band updates. These frequencies are primarily used by the Arden group, which is the ham-WAN people, but also used for amateur experimentation, we're looking at propagation studies and EME use. So these are active bands. They're not as active as 20 meters or 2 meters, but there are people up there. We do use them, and ham-WAN is an increasingly increasing use of this band. And recall that the FCC is at the same time is busy trying to auction off these frequencies for 5G and commercial telecom use. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And please note that on both of these bands, the 9 centimeter band and the 5 centimeter band, we have always been secondary allocation, which means we always have to move aside with, not interfere with, and accept being interfered by the primary users. So the fact that somebody comes in and moves in on one of these bands means that we have to move, not them. We are secondary allocation. A little bit deeper dive into the proposal for the 3.3 to 3.5 gigahertz band. It started with NPRM document 19-348, which was entitled Facilitating Shared Use in the 3.1 to 3.55 gigahertz band in November of 2019. And it really calls for auctioning off the 3.4 to 3.5 gigahertz band to the telecom guys for their 5G networks. It also incidentally called for the sunsetting of all amateur radio activity on the entire band by 2022. In other words, everybody except the people we're selling it to get off there. They kicked off the defense people, they kicked off the satellite people. They tried to kick off the amateurs, but the amateurs fought back, and in a rather big way, largely in part to the ARRL. As I mentioned, the ARRL bitterly opposed this action, and Sadal got involved directly with the people at the FCC. And the result of that, it was in March of 2021, the FCC adopted their final rules for the ban and indicated that amateurs could keep their secondary allocation on the lower part of the band indefinitely until further FCC action. In other words, okay, you guys, we'll go down there, have your fun, we'll auction off the rest of them, and we'll auction off the other ones too, but you guys can still say secondary on the bottom. However, at the high end of the band, the 3.45 to 3.5, sometime they're saying in early 2022, there's going to be the new movers using these frequencies for the 5G telecom network, and U.S. amateurs are going to have to cease operations and just move everything down to the lower end of the band. So I consider this, and I think everybody should consider this a win. People can say, well, why didn't the ARRL save the band, right? Well, when you got these telecom companies throwing billions of dollars at the FCC to buy these frequencies, they don't really care about amateurs too much, who, by the way, are going to be paying $35 for a 10-year license here, and right now aren't paying anything. So I consider this to be a big win for amateurs, and I really want to thank the work that the ARRL has done. I really had no part of it in my role as a director, but the league has been working on this, and especially our ARRL FCC counsel, David Sadal, for being behind this and really working with the FCC to get us. And this is really a win. I hope everybody thinks of it as a win. It's better to keep something than to lose everything. 5.9 gigahertz band, which started with FCC docket 19-138, the improved use of the 5.8 to 5.925 gigahertz band in December of 2019. However, unlike the 3.3 gigahertz band, there was no real plan to kick all the amateurs out. We would remain secondary no matter what happened. However, what they were going to do was allocate the bottom 45 megahertz of this band for unlicensed use, which means there'd be tons more Wi-Fi routers, and they were going to give the upper 20 megahertz was going to be sold to Ford Motor Company for their autonomous vehicle program. And that may be really a bigger problem than the Wi-Fi routers. Wi-Fi routers generally don't have a lot of range, and the ham WAN is generally pretty much point to point. So I don't think there's going to be as much interference problem for the Wi-Fi guys as it's going to be with the autonomous vehicle program. I hate to bring something up on a frequency that's going to cause a car to crash into a tree. So I think that's going to have to still be worked out how they're going to be able to coexist when they're using this upper portion of the band for running autonomous vehicles. It's going to be interesting. I'm not sure it's going to be data collection or just exactly how it's going to work, but that's what it's going to be. That's what it's earmarked for. I'm not sure that Ford, however, has written a check for that yet. And in November 2020, the good news is the FCC confirmed that we would remain a secondary allocation, but basically we'd have to learn to live with the new users on the band. In other words, you are secondary, as I mentioned before, just like the 3.3 gigahertz band. You're secondary. If a primary user is there, you got to move. If the primary user interferes with you, you've got to move. If you interfere with him, you've got to move, right? I mean, it's that simple. That's what being secondary is all about. So that's the end of my presentation. I want to thank you guys this evening. I hope I didn't put everybody to sleep, but as you can tell, this is something that I'm very passionate about. It's something I've been working very heavily with the board with, and I will now, can you, how do I get this thing to get back to the normal screen? Oh, there we go. Mm-hmm. Now I can't see anybody though. I can only see like 5 people. Dan changed something and oh, there we are. I have to go back into manual gallery. So are there any questions on the activity, on what I've talked about here this evening? Did you guys find it useful? Did anybody learn anything other than the fact that all the board members are idiots?
Yeah, sure did, Mike. Andre, K6AH. I'm the project manager of the Arden project.
Oh, great.
Even though we're a secondary user, we still have a higher status in the band than the unlicensed user, right?
That's correct. You're absolutely correct. I'm talking about the licensed users. No, you're absolutely, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay, I'm noticing some hands up here. Gary, W2MIT, I think he had his up first. You want to take it away, Gary?
Okay, I wasn't first, but thank you. I'm just wondering, some of those things that have been sitting in a comment phase for so many years, what explains how those could have languished, and like what other kind of things are, share that are in that same boat, sitting around for so many years? Why wasn't it moved forward since then?
Well, I can tell you a couple things. Number one was we didn't really have an FCC council. We had an ARRL legal council. And so there wasn't anybody really interacting with the FCC. And I can also tell you in the last 5 or 6 years, the FCC has changed pretty dramatically. Keep in mind that all the commissioners are political appointments. Every time there's a political regime change, they all change and their priorities change, right? The telecom market is consuming a lot of their time. Amateurs are a blip on their radar. The other thing that I think has happened that David Siddall has mentioned is that all the hams used to have a lot of people on their side within the FCC who were licensed amateurs. Riley Hollinsworth comes into mind, even David Siddall, right? He came from the FCC, and those guys have all retired and left. And the people that are left there are saying, I got all this stuff, what do I do with it? Here, I'll hide it in the bottom of my in basket. Right? And if nobody ever talks about it, it doesn't go anywhere. So that's one of the reasons that I'm working with Siddall pretty regularly. I say to the point where he's about tired of listening to me. Perfect. I put a question out him onto our ODV reflector a couple of weeks ago, and he never responded. And finally, Rick Roderick, our president, came back and said, hey, did you ever get a response back from him on this? And then I finally cornered him at the end of the EC meeting to find out where we were with it, because it's been almost a year since we even put the band planning proposal, but that still hasn't even been submitted. So some of it's the ARRL's fault, you know, and I'm pushing it as much as I can. But a lot of it has to do with changes and changes in priority at the FCC, both personnel and staff changes, and their what they're working on and what their knowledge of amateur radio is. I mean, it even gets down to being that basic.
Okay, John, you want to, you got your hand up there, you want to come on here? KG7WFQ, Washington.
Sure, thank you very much. Yeah, Mike, I'm about a couple hundred miles north of you. I'm heavily involved in MCOM and WinLink usage. And if I understood correctly, in the 80-meter band, we're going to be limited to, for WinLink, from 3600 up to 3650, which is fine, but that's the US changing its rules. Is there anything going to go on in Canada? Because that would eliminate me being able to access the best gateway I have for HF WinLink, because it's in Eastern BC.
Well, that's the first time I've heard about that. I understand what you're saying. That's going to be an interesting question. I don't know what the WinLink, what the bandwidth from the RAC guys was, or you know exactly where they are off the top of my head, and what their allocation for wideband digital is in ACDS.
Well, I don't. All I know is that a number of their gateways are down or below 3600. I know they have at least one around that I've noticed that's above that, but they're pretty much in the same band as we are currently. More or less, I'm not sure, you know.
Yeah, I'll have to find out. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know if they have the ability to move up there too. I don't know what the off the top of my head what the Canadian rules are. I know for 40 meters they're a little bit different frequency than we are. It may be where they can just move along with us. I don't have an answer to that. However, I took a note to find out and get back with you. KG7FK. That's a great question. That's the first time anybody's ever brought that up.
Because when the big quake happens, they might have to arrest me afterwards for violating those frequencies when I try to get out on that gateway in BC.
That's probably not going to happen, because all the volunteer monitors will be covering their own butts. Let me tell you.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Oscar, did you have something?
Yeah, Oscar, go ahead.
Oh, you're muted.
Mike, your presentation is really great and informative, and it's going right on track, and I like it a lot. Definitely, we are in the Caribbean. We are in Region 2 as Hawaii, and by chance we use the same frequency just by chance for tactical communication and transmitting with WinLink point to point within the disaster like Maria. And this is what Joe Speroni and their whole ARES team practice over there in Hawaii, that they keep communication across all the 6 islands. And it's very important because the network can fail, and it actually had failed by power, even by power services that have been down for days. So in reality, if we keep it, it's fine. But what about making a tactical and WinLink communication nationwide? So everybody, when knows there is a catastrophe, we can monitor and follow. That doesn't mean that, you know, it is dangerous, I understand. But during the case of Maria, Hurricane Maria and Irma, we were there for weeks, I mean, actually months, and we didn't have a single interference at all. And we were able to communicate for 6 weeks within the island, transmitting all the emergency traffic. And that allows us to communicate voice. And then when we were ready to transfer the file, we were ready to, that is extremely important for ENCOM. So
probably the way to handle that is the same way they do for PACDOR 4 now, which is to get a special dispensation from the FCC. That may be the best way to handle that.
And being nationwide, everybody in Thursday or here, they know that is the emergency communication frequency or channel, if you want to call it, and be utilized properly so any emergency, you can go there and ask for help, because then we will be like a single point of meeting, like having a special room for emergency communication. And it is a thought. We probably need to discuss it to mature it, but it's an interesting idea.
And Oscar, I think it's a great idea. And what I would do is I would send that message to Paul Gilbert back at headquarters, who is coming out with our Aries 2.0 plan, right? And see if that can be incorporated in there somehow. So I think that's a great idea. I'd recommend you work with Paul on that.
And by the way, even that we were transmitting in 7.085, it happens to be that all Latin America, they were actually skipping any communication 5 kilohertz up and down because they were monitoring as well. They knew that we were transmitting really important information in the tactical and controlling the situation and messages, and the band was empty in that section. Nobody else was there.
Yeah, in a big disaster, especially one that would affect the entire country, all the rules go out the window anyway. Nobody's going to be sitting there looking at the FCC regulation book, you know, saying, "Oh, I think I can't do that." Any more questions? Dan, do you have see anybody else with their hand raised?
I do not. There's nothing in chat. That's a question.
So I either covered it very well, or everybody's so confused now they don't know what to think.
I think this was a better presentation than you did for the SMs, and you had over twice as many people that you did on the SM presentation.
Yeah, and I see, yeah, Paul's on here now. So anyway, yeah, I want to thank you guys for the chance to do this. This also brings it to my my forefront again. It's been kind of it's glad to get away from something other than ARRL Foundation scholarship. So as I mentioned, I'm going to keep driving this to try to get all these RMs taken care of. You know, it's something we've been talking about on the board for 3 years, and yet nothing ever seems to get done. Kind of like some other things sometimes that happen on the board too. So I'll keep pushing this as much as I can to try to get it done.
I've never figured out, still scratching my head, where the molasses got poured into the league, where everybody kind of slows up when they get to a certain part. It just goes into slow motion.
Well, I can't believe it. It's taken us a year since it was approved at the board to even get it submitted. But, you know, Siddall has his reasons for doing things, and I don't want to question those. But you know, it is what it is, and I keep pushing the button.
That's all you can do. Roger, you got your hand up.
Yeah, question. The slides that showed the present and future, let me get that, no, it's out of the way. Future band plan, are those going to be available in some way or another?
Well, they're going to be on this presentation, and I can, if you want, I could email them to you.
Well, Mike, when send that thing to me, and I make them available to everybody, because there's going to be a lot of people that.
Yeah, it's basically just it's a PowerPoint presentation that I incorporated into this PowerPoint. So yeah. I could convert that to PDF, and then you can hang them on your wall if you want, and throw darts at them.
Sounds like a great idea.
All right, I don't see
up north. I'd be throwing snowballs.
I don't see more hands raised yet. Are there? Let's see if somebody wants to speak out of turn. Speak up. You have a comment? What a quiet bunch. It was a good presentation, Mike.
I see a bunch of chats here. Let me look at some of the.
They're just
nothing in the chat.
Just attaboys and throwing flowers at you because you did a great job.
Well, and we have one thing it says that the ARRL only makes recommendation is the FCC who makes the final decision. And you're absolutely right. Is all we can do is suggest to the FCC, here's what we want. That's why I say that's, as I indicated, these are proposals being submitted to the FCC. They may decide to do something different, but keep in mind that there aren't a lot of amateurs that work there anymore. And they're probably going to accept what we tell them that we want. So, because they may not know any better. So I would not imagine there is going to be much changed in these from what we submit to them.
That could go either way. Robert, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I wondered. I thought about this, and I decided I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Regarding the expanded privileges for technician. Let me preface this by I'm a licensed course instructor. I've taught a number of technician and general courses, and even a couple of extra. I always encourage my technician people to go on and get their general. I tell them the step to get your general from technician is about the same step as if you knew nothing about radio and you got your technician. It's about the same height of step. And most of my courses are associated with my RACES group as a recruiting effort. Most of the time, it's just met with indifference. My impression is people that want to get on HF are motivated and will get on HF, and it's hard to get people to do it if they're not motivated originally somehow. That being said, I'm not that opposed to the changes. I don't view them as like the end of the world or something like that. But I think the big impediments to technicians getting on HF are A, just what I was just saying, lack of interest. B, and C would be, depending on the personal circumstances, either logistics, putting up antennas, or finances of buying an HF rig. And so I don't exactly oppose the changes, but I don't see them as doing that much. And I'm wondering what evidence the ARL had that it would actually generate more interest among technicians to get on HF. I mean, yeah, the privileges are there, but like I say, I view the impediments as if you're not interested originally, those privileges aren't going to get you to go to the work to get on HF.
The only thing, I understand this, happened before I came on the board. So what happened before then, I can't tell you. But what I can tell you is that I see it primarily as being a benefit to MCOM, for the technicians to be able to take over the HF stations and operate traffic nets, and also the ability to get on to HF traffic nets and learn how to be a net manager and learn how to be on a net. So I mean, for them, they'll be able to get educated on the MCOM side better than they can with just VHF and UHF privileges now. I see Oscar has his hand raised. You want to make a comment, Oscar?
Thank you, Mike. My experience during Hurricane Maria, I was a section manager actually in charge of Puerto Rico during Hurricane Maria. And as Mike said, in an emergency, all the rule goes away because then you have to play to save a property and most important, lives. You have the energy and the numbers with the technicians, and they're willing to stay during the day, during the afternoon, during the evening, and work for you. And they can do the proper practice, they can learn more. And at the end, what's going to happen, they're going to be jumping to general as well. But in case of an emergency, you need those workforce to work with you legally. So when prepare them on the courses and see our faces here, how old we are, 40 and older. But we need those youngsters to be part of our team and come in and get the training and be into the technology. And if an emergency comes, we have more resources of technicians that it can work in an emergency. So definitely it's a good idea for income.
Okay.
And you think about why people are joining amateur radio right now. And I got news for you. Most of them are not joining to become a great contester. They're there because they went to a Red Cross meeting, and Red Cross said, get your amateur radio license. They're there because they're part of the Church of the Mormons, and they say, get your amateur radio license for when the big one hits, we'll be able to communicate. They're getting their license because they're a prepper, because they want to storm the Capitol. Who knows, right? But I think now, particularly, MCOM's a big part of it. And with the, by the way, and as far as them getting on the air, I think with the FT8 modes that's now, and any future mode that comes out, you're going to see people doing less or more HF activity with less power and smaller antennas than you ever have before. And I think HF activity is going to go up tremendously, especially in the digital mode. Maybe not on phone, not on CW, certainly, but certainly on the digital modes. Mm-hmm. I know several people that are just clamoring to get on, and think of it as a way to give them a taste of what they can do on the amateur bands that they can't do now. And if they want more, well, hey, I got to get all the stations are down here in the phone portion. All the DX is down here in the extra portion. I got to get my extra. I got to get my general. So the idea is to provide an incentive. If you notice, I mentioned they don't get the 20-meter band.
Yeah.
Right. The 20-meter band is the most active band, amateur band, that there is on the HF side. It's most active in contests. It's most active for normal traffic. They don't get that band until they get their general. They can get on the other bands and play around, They decide they like it. Hey, move on and get your general. So it gives them a taste. It gives them some incentive. It gives them a little bit of something to tell what's going on there. And as I say, that's a big boon for the MCOM people.
Okay.
Hope
Well,
that answers your question.
Like I said, I teach my classes for my races group, so that's definitely a motivation. Like I say, I'm not opposed to it so much as I just wondered about its value. But if you know people that you think it will work for and get them going,
well,
yeah.
I'll ask you a question. What will it hurt?
Well, and I'm not saying that's my point. I wasn't saying it was the end of the world. I was just saying, no, I'm not sure if this is really going to do it. I know what I've done to try to get people to get on HF and to go for their general license, and it wasn't the difficulty of the general license exam that seemed to be the issue. It was either apathy or other impediments.
And the biggest con against this proposal doesn't come from those people. It comes from the guys that are like me, that were licensed back when we had to take the 20-word-a-minute code test and sit before the FCC commissioner in their offices, and like I did in downtown San Francisco, trying to take the extra 20-word-a-minute code test with the back windows open with jackhammers going on downstairs. I mean, you know, I had to do that. By God, everybody should have to do that. And you know, it's technology's changed, people have changed, thoughts have changed, and you know, it's let's keep the hobby alive, right? That's what it's really what it's all about.
Yeah, I say, you know, if it will actually get more people on HF and get them moving to their general, that's good.
We'll see.
Yeah, I was just doubtful of whether it would. So.
Let's find out.
Okay, we're moving on here. Any more questions?
Tom had his hand up.
I don't understand.
What'd you say there, Barry?
Tom had his hand up.
Well, Tom, you took it back down. Let's get it back up. Tom, KF2GC?
Oh, I got my hand up. I like what you're doing with the band plan. I like the idea of being able to know where certain digital forms and modes are being used. I think that's really important because everything was just CW or RIDI or something, and that was all you could see on the thing, and it was really not helping people to know where to go if they had, let's say, an Android and they wanted to use NBEMS and they wanted to go on and listen on Olivia 8500 or something like that. And, you know, they just didn't know. They had no idea. Now, unless you're, you know, into a group like we just had, I just got on here a little late, but we had a digital net and we were passing digital messages in MT63-2000L on 2 meters. But the point is that, and a lot of these young guys that have got Androids are interested in that because they can use their Android to copy and send digital. And I would imagine that eventually this FT8, which is a digital mode, they'll be able to do something like that also, so that they can have an input into and get a copy of digital message and get it through in ham radio is really great. So they're starting to see, you know, the emergency aspect of this and how it can be useful and how important it is, especially in conditions when the conditions aren't that great. The other night there, we did the health and welfare with about 24 of the hospitals here in northern New York. And we have operators not working at the hospitals now, but on their own home stations and relaying the messages in. We fax them in or we get them in emails or whatever way we can get them into them of our operation and how many, you know, stations are involved in our hospital net and health and welfare net. So this band, being able to know where we can operate and carry out those nets is really going to be important. So, you know, if you're thinking of NBEMS, for us up here in northern New York, that's really one of the ways right now that we're finding that really is useful because of spotty connections. Like digital gets through. It's amazing how digital gets through, even with all of the noise and interference and crackling and popping and all that stuff going on. The messages still get through. It's really great.
It's the error
to have.
correction
Yep.
that occurs. Yeah.
That's it. That's really great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, anyway,
Okay.
thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, David in Alaska.
Yeah, Mike, I agree with you. Everybody should have to take their ham test with the jackhammer going on and try to figure out 20 word of code. But half of our amateurs are technician class licensed. I have a gentleman who's real active in Elmdorf Amateur Radio Club. He has a sick wife. He has a G5 RV stuck in the attic of his condo. It has 42,000 contacts on digital. With no house, just a condo. Yeah, he'd go up to Elmdorf and talk on a big, nice station where he could stay at home and make contacts digitally with his, be around his wife sick.
That was that paradigm shift I was talking about.
Yeah.
The ability to do more with less, and it's only gonna get better from there. I mean, pretty soon, you know, maybe my my smartwatch here can start, you know, sending CW on 20 meters for me someday. Who knows? Work the FCC from my smartwatch.
Right.
Via Bluetooth. Via Bluetooth.
Yeah.
Yeah, your smartphones are the young people are using their smartphones and using this Android a lot, and they're getting used to getting involved in amateur radio. It's just another way of them incorporating it in. APRS is another thing that's good up here, is because they like to try to keep track of, well, where's the Mrs. or where's the Mr. and stuff like that. So
especially if you're married, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
That
I'm
helps.
sure Ron's an extra class radio operator. I've known him for years, but 42,000 contacts at home with a G5 RV stuck in his attic because he's got a condo restriction on antennas. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is. It is, David.
I think that's the way of going.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions?
I don't see more hands raised yet.
No, Ryan. I see Ryan's got his hand raised.
Oh, you see a hand raised?
I see Ryan. Yeah, KC0 Quebec November Bravo.
Well, Ryan, take it away.
All righty. I hope you can all hear me.
Yep.
I'm using a software to make my old smartphone work as a webcam. Well, it seems to work. Anyway, I was originally licensed in 2003. I upgraded to general in 2018. So there's a 15-year stretch that I didn't do a lot. I'm still not doing a bunch, but I upgraded because I wanted to. And I've tossed about, well, we bought a piece of property out in Nebraska Panhandle with 32 acres. And so this year I've been spending a lot of my time thinking about that. But maybe after I get settled out there, maybe I'll go ahead and go up with my extra. I don't know yet. MCOM around here in my part of the state currently is pretty much non-existent. There's a Saturn operation that's based out of Omaha, which is 250 miles away from me, and they don't even reach out to the Panhandle. But I think the key there is, like the one guy was saying, the upgrade is because they're gonna, you know, they can get a taste of it, and working income and stuff as technicians, that's great, that's fantastic. And by having the ability to be trained on how to properly do it would be a big thing, instead of bringing somebody in just out of an emergency. So I guess that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Dick, you got your hand up.
Yeah. I just want to tell Mike that he had it made with having to fight the jackhammers during his exam with the FCC. I took my general and my advanced in 1977 at the FCC office in Boston, which was up in Custom House. And that was the ultimate distraction, because we had this beautiful view of the Boston Harbor out there to distract us from doing it. So he had it made with just having to fight jackhammers.
Well, I was concentrating so hard I wouldn't have had the chance to look at anything else. I was too busy looking at my paper, writing down the characters.
If you like most of us, your hand was sweating like crazy. You probably keep
Yeah,
that
and it
fit.
was a hot day and the back windows were open. I was on the 4th floor, which is why I could hear the jackhammers. But I think they actually cued them to start right at the beginning of the test.
Well, I remember the FCC guy. He had a New England accent, and I asked him, "Isn't there a sending test?" And he threw me a copy of the Boston Globe, and he says, "Stop sending that. It says President Carter." And I said PRE, and he said, "You can send. Get out of here."
Okay.
All right.
Anybody
Well,
else?
does anybody else? I'm gonna say good evening to everybody and thank Dan for inviting me here this evening, and wish everybody all the best and get your shots and get through it.
Yes, definitely. Stay well.
All right.
For those that don't know, you should all by now. Tomorrow's presentation will be on the Radio Relay International. We have a good presentation on that. I hope to see most of you back on that. It should be a
All right. Good night, everybody.
Before you leave, Mike.
Oh, yeah.
Voice takes 100 watts, CW can take 5 watts, and digital can take less than a half watt. You can't even hear the signal. So that's how much difference it is in the technology.
Yeah, no, I understand. And the noise, and FT8 can pick signals out below the noise of where the human ear can even hear the signal there. That's pretty amazing.
Yes.
Well, you need us to have pot holders for your wife, or she got, or not?
Yeah.
You need us to have pot holders?
I'm having trouble understanding you.
Yeah, you're not as clear as you usually are there, David.
Okay. Do you need another set of pot holders?
Oh,
sure.
no, I'm fine right now. No, thank you very much for those. I think I mentioned it. I got those and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
David in Alaska has a tendency to send out pot holders that he and his wife put together, and that's what they were talking about. Okay, with that, I'm going to close this out unless anybody got any last minute comments they want to say or questions.
Well, thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
73s.